Good morning. My name is Ernie Broughton, and I'm a senior advisor for the Ethics and Compliance Initiative. I'd like to welcome you to our opening keynote, The War on COVID, an E&C perspective from inside pharma. We'll wait just a moment, let a few more people get in the room, get their seats. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to introduce our panelists for our session this morning, Ashley Watson and Rady Johnson. And so let me tell you a little bit about each of them. Ashley Watson currently serves as the Worldwide General Counsel for Medical Devices at Johnson & Johnson. She joined Johnson & Johnson in December of 2018 as the Chief Compliance Officer and the head of Johnson & Johnson's Healthcare Compliance Organization. But Ashley reminded me before our session today that ethics and compliance is in her heart because she has a lot of other experience as a Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer. She came to J&J from Merck & Company, where she was the Senior Vice President and the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer. And prior to joining Merck in 2015, she was the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer for Hewlett-Packard Company, and also served there as Vice President and Deputy General Counsel for Global Functions. She had experience before that in litigation, employment law, and government investigations. And so we're really pleased to have you, Ashley. Welcome.
Thanks, Ernie. Good to be here.
And so we are joined by Rady Johnson. And Rady is the Executive Vice President and Pfizer's Chief Compliance, Quality, and Risk Officer. In that role, he has overall responsibility for Pfizer's Global Ethics and Compliance Program and leads their regulatory quality assurance and global security operations. And in that capacity, he's a member of Pfizer's executive leadership team. Prior to joining Pfizer in 1994, he practiced food and drug law in Washington, D.C. with Hogan and Hartson, and was formerly a CPA with Arthur Andersen, also in D.C. He is also the current chair of the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations Ethics and Business Integrity Committee. And so welcome, Rady.
Morning. Thank you, Ernie. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, Rady. Thanks for doing this.
Great to see you. It'll be fun.
And so obviously these folks know each other. And so we're going to have a very intimate and interesting conversation. And I'd like to set the expectations of what we're going to talk about. First of all, we really like for this conversation to tap into the shared experience of you, our audience, because many of you are Chief Ethics and Compliance Officers, or you are ethics and compliance practitioners. You have a particular view and a mindset with your organization. And that's what we want to tap into with Rady and Ashley, is what this experience has been like in terms of their positions as leaders in ethics and compliance within the pharmaceutical industry and within their respective organizations. And so we are going to encourage Q&A. We want you to send in questions, but I do want to set the expectation in terms of what we will be able to cover. We're not going to be able to talk about the science behind this because our presenters are not scientists. We're not going to talk about distribution issues and problems because the pharmaceutical companies are not in control of distribution. And if we could probably make lists of ethics issues related to this, pages of ethics issues, but our presenters are not ethicists. They are, and not bioethicists. They are ethics and compliance officers just like you. And so I would like for you to enter questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. And so with that, let's get started. First of all, I want to ask you, have you received the vaccine?
Yes.
How about
I
you?
have. As of last Wednesday, I was fully vaccinated.
That's
Good.
great.
Yeah.
Both. I've had one shot, and it was not the J&J shot. I'm disappointed to say, but and it wasn't the Pfizer. I was also disappointed, but it is a highly effective Moderna vaccine that I was able to get because someone called me and said they've got extra at a vaccine site, and I rushed out and got in line and was able to get my first shot.
That's
Yeah,
great. I have my shots too.
I have one more to go in a few weeks.
How about you, Rady? Do you have another shot coming up? Or you
Now
have-
I'm all done. I became fully vaccinated a week ago, actually. So we could almost do this in person now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. We can breathe on each other. And did you get the Pfizer?
I did. Yeah. It was a big deal, when the product first became available, I think in mid-December, give or take. And all my friends and family assumed I was going to be first in line for it. And in fact, we were towards the end. We spent a lot of time talking about, all of a sudden it was available. And we talked a lot about what we ought to do kind of for Pfizer employees and among the leadership and the board and all that kind of stuff. And it was quickly a decision not to give any of us the vaccine for a while. We were all going to wait our turn, watch the rules and regulations as they evolved in the various states or different parts of the world where we all were, and we stuck to that. The one exception we made kind of early, probably in towards the end of January, I guess, if I'm remembering, was we realized that the manufacturing folks who need to go to work every day to keep making the vaccine needed to be protected. So of all of our colleagues, that was the first population that we kind of started to make it available to. But everybody else waited a couple of more months. But we're excited now and we're proud. We're proud of it. We do tell everybody, take what you're offered. That was the key. Don't worry. We know lots of Pfizer people who got Moderna and J&J and the like. So we're just lucky to have choices.
What about you, Ashley? Did that unfold the same way for you?
Yeah, Ernie, the same for J&J. I think I do. I think all my friends are like, well, I'm sure you've already gotten the shot, and I was like, nope, we're waiting. We had a big discussion. I think even like, should our CEO publicly get it earlier because you do want people to be supportive of the vaccine, but realize, there's plenty of people publicly have done it. Everybody needs to wait their turn. And just like Pfizer, I think our first priority, to the extent we were going to be able to give it to employees, and I think that has now started, is to go to our people in the front lines who are making not just the vaccine, but all the the pharmaceutical companies and all the healthcare companies have had to also continue, providing all the other medicines that we make that are life-changing and life-saving. And so those people have always been the priority. I think obviously for Pfizer, for us, and frankly for probably all the healthcare companies.
And so what I'd like to do in starting out here is to have you take us back to the beginning. And so I'm going to put you under regression hypnosis for a minute, and we're going to go back to January, February of last year. Tell me a little bit about how this unfolded for you and what it was like at the very beginning.
Brady, you should go first because Pfizer got approved first.
Okay. It's funny, thinking about today and being here and maybe having to answer a question like that was kind of the first time I went back to the beginning myself, to be honest with you, because I realized when you go back, you just had forgotten so much about it because it just was happening so fast and you just had to kind of survive and get through the phases. But in looking back, it was amazing. What startled me the most, to be honest with you, as I refreshed my recollection, was how this literally, seemingly literally came out of nowhere, and how quickly the world had to all of a sudden, there it was. And I was remembering that even like in late China, just before the holidays of 19, I guess, we've all kind of lost a year. I was actually I was in China for business, and we were talking about all sorts of stuff. Pfizer has a pretty robust operations there, but we weren't talking about anything related to COVID. And then even in January, we had our kind of traditional executive offsite to kind of plan for the year ahead. And of all the things we were planning for, we weren't talking about COVID. We actually experienced an earthquake where we were, and we thought that would be the highlight of the year, so to speak. And we quickly forgot about the earthquake. So all that just reminded me how fast this came up, and then how quickly the world, all the companies and all the world had to kind of pivot and immediately kind of go into a different mode. We had a crisis management team, I think, that we set up probably in late February, which even then initially it was just kind of helping manage our China operations and a few other things. But just within a matter of days or weeks, just there it was, and expanded everything. So in the rapid fire succession, it was just, the first decisions to, the focus in the main three things were really just all the employees, all our colleagues, what to tell them to do, how to try to support them, how to make them feel confident, safe, et cetera, and handle all those things. I'm sure we'll come back to more of that as the rest of the conversation goes on. The next thing was, and Ashley touched on this, normal operations. I kind of called it keeping the trains on the tracks. The trains that we already have, how do you keep them on the tracks? And the biggest focus and concern at the time was just our ability to continue to supply all the other medicines that we make. We weren't talking about a vaccine yet. We weren't talking about anything responsive to COVID itself. And that was a big challenge, because immediately, even we supply a lot of hospital products, just as an example. And there was real concerns about shortages on those fronts, just because all the hospitals around the world were so filled to capacity because of COVID. So just how do you keep that going? And we were able to do it. It was a lot of work, a lot of effort. And then just all the transition of employees to the digital, the remote work, and everything. And then really quickly after that, we did immediately turn to the response to the COVID situation itself, which led ultimately to the identification of the vaccine and so on. But that's the high level. It just happened so fast. I mean, the ability to kind of pivot and keep things going was just stunningly remarkable when you think about it. And I'm sure so many people in the audience have we all have the same experience. We were all kind of in the same situation for sure.
What about you?
Yeah, I mean, similar, right? And I think, it's interesting. We all went through, it really is an interesting sort of collective human experience that we've gone through, and that everyone has had loss, and shock and those sorts of things in different degrees, of course. But we've all had something shared here. And I think when you think back to this time last year and before, February, March, I think from a business perspective, it was this sort of, remember how what a big decision it was for us all to stay home. I know people I left food in the fridge. It didn't dawn on me. I was like, somebody needs to get that out at mid-May. I was like, but we just didn't think, it was not thinkable that we would go home and that many of us would stay home. And I think, it was so many things at once. And obviously as a company, Pfizer did this, Johnson & Johnson and other companies, made the decision, I think all healthcare companies were sort of, scanning everything they had in their current products and in what was in R&D to see if there might be something that was a cure, something to help treat this horrible disease. And then obviously the decision that we made, Pfizer made, and others made, to develop a vaccine. And then the resources and the effort that has to go to making that decision, deciding to make that investment, and sort of basically then all of the energy that has to go to making that happen in such a short amount of time, while also keeping, like I said, all of the other products that are so essential to the world, making sure that those continue to go. It really was an overwhelming time for everyone. in terms of taking care of yourself and taking care of our patients. It's hard to describe it, and in some ways I don't know, Rady, what you think, but I'm not sure we've ever even left that mode. We've just gotten used to it, because there is still so many things that people have in the air that we're trying to manage. It's just, again, I think healthcare was, if you're in the healthcare business, you've felt it in a way that may be different from other businesses, but still, in any other industry, there were still all the other things that all of us felt collectively.
Two things.
I remember looking at, watching, I don't know, whichever news, I don't want to talk about which news people watch, but whatever. The sort of the ticking up of the number of cases and the number of deaths, and it got to 500, and I was like, oh, there's no way, that's, you were outraged, and that's like the idea that we could ever get to 100,000 just seemed unthinkable. And now that we are where we are, it's been an extraordinary year.
Yeah, just to add, Ashley, two things that were kind of just amazing to watch was just the how people did come together. There's a lot of stepping in the void need because everything was first impression. Issues were being presented every single day that no one had ever seen before, and so it's just neat to kind of watch people, realize, wait, no one else is doing that. Let's step into the void. And then even across our industry and across healthcare. Just how the industry kind of came together itself, to be honest with you. It was it felt like a very supportive, collaborative kind of experience.
Yeah,
well, that's something I'd like to ask you both about, is that the pharmaceutical industry is known as being fiercely competitive. So what did that look like? When you're all confronted with this common kind of challenge, did that change that mindset a little bit?
It did. I'll just jump in. It did, and it seemingly did very quickly, to be honest with you. I just think the gravity of the situation just suddenly hit people. I know we issued kind of a 5-point plan back in the first or second week of March, just kind of once we kind of dealt with our own stuff, we just realized, we stepped back and realized, we have a role to play, that all the life sciences have a role to play to try to get their hands around this stuff. And we issued a 5-point plan. And one of the points was, we'll either help others in the industry, we'll offer our scientific expertise or our manufacturing capabilities if that's what's necessary, or we'll look for help from others. So it was kind of a declaration kind of early on. Because I think we were just, in total honesty, we didn't know what we were dealing with, and we knew it was going to take everybody to try to wrestle this to the ground in one way or the other. And the relationships, it's a small world in many respects. All of our, it starts with our scientists, to be perfectly candid. They all are so passionate, so dedicated, so amazing. And one experience that we've all been through is that people understand their heroism and their role much better than they might have going into this. But I think the network that they have with another really helped facilitate a lot of the door opening when it came to that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's interesting, Ernie, about competition. I don't know, we may get into it at some point. I'm one of those that believes capitalism is good, and competition is good. But I think people probably don't realize how. Certainly, I know in talking with Rady, I know, having been at Merck and certainly now at Johnson & Johnson, that the patients and the global health guide all of us. It's the guiding light for all of these really good ethical companies. I know that every pharmaceutical company is not equal, but certainly these companies. And I remember when I was at Merck and we were really focused on on some medicines to help solve cancer, and other companies came out with results that were really positive for cancer. And you know what? Everyone was happy because we're curing cancer. And yes, do we want our product to do well and sell well and be the cure? Of course, but people celebrated the good results. I think the same when I'm at Johnson & Johnson, when Moderna and Pfizer results came out, it was a hallelujah, right? Because you're talking with people who to their core are in this business, I think, because they want to help solve these large health problems. And so I do think this pandemic was a mechanism of the level of sharing of information, Frankly, some of the legal and compliance issues around that, right, are some things we had to step in on to make sure that's done in the right way. But I do think it is I could not have been more proud to be in healthcare during this time. And I was already proud of it, but I think it really came through that this is a world problem that we have a way to contribute.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about culture, because I think that's such a foundational piece of our conversation. Before I get to that, kind of looking at some of the questions that are coming in, can you please talk about the ethical practices involving in creating and testing the vaccines? I heard there are some religious groups that have boycotted J&J vaccine because of some ethical concerns. I think what we're really talking about too is the anti-vax movement. So any comment about that?
I'll start with that. I will say one of the things that was part of discussed at J&J was because of the speed at which this people at least anticipated it was going to be done, and frankly, some of the dialogue that was happening in politics, which is we don't have to really get into, but not necessarily helpful. That there was an importance to be as transparent as possible and about the process, about safety, and to sort of assure people that although faster than what we're used to, still no corners being cut, no steps being skipped. And it was one of the reasons that J&J did issued this. It's called The Life of a Vaccine. You can find it. But basically, it was sort of a series of educational and sort of informative interviews and so forth, starting last summer. We didn't know if our vaccine would be effective. We didn't know what it would be, but basically trying to educate on the process so that people could learn. And look, it doesn't help anybody if you make an effective vaccine and no one will take it, right? And people need to have confidence in it, and not all people do, right? I'm not completely sure why, but that was one of the priorities at J&J. And obviously in partnership, right, with others, to make sure that the right information gets out, so that people can have the right confidence.
That by the way, your vaccine journey, that was great. I watched it. It was really good. So if people haven't seen it, they should see it. That was out there early, to be honest with you. I mean, the first things, the narrative people had when they realized, okay, we need some vaccines or we need some therapeutics to kind of help us manage this. It took a lot of people started thinking, what is a vaccine? What's the story about a vaccine? The first things people heard was like, it takes 10 years to do it. The fastest it's ever happened was 4 years. And then they're hearing companies like all of us declare that we're going to do whatever it takes to get something by the end of the year. Now, you had to make that statement. You had to put the target out there. And frankly, there's lots of reasons you had to do it. Whether we could do it or not was the challenge. But early on, the narrative was there's no way they can do that without cutting corners. And that just became, whether it was lack of confidence in our regulators, whether it was building on the already pre-existing kind of suspicion and cynicism they have for our industry as a whole, or the like. And so we had to just, this whole thing started in a far more transparent manner, in a very public manner than average drug development or vaccine development would normally be experiencing. From day one, all of our companies were just doing it internally and making it happen. And then almost in a real-time basis, being very transparent and public about what we were doing, where we were, how it was going, et cetera, et cetera. And we were doing that because of we had to convince people, our rallying cry early on, one of our 5 points was that we were going to do all this without any compromise to integrity, quality, safety, and that kind of thing. Got repeated time and time again. And we just realized we had to, a big part of it was being able to educate everybody about the rigor, the complexity, and the rigor that the industry has already for all of its products. All the GXPs, the manufacturing, the clinical requirements, everything that goes in there, all the regulations that a lot of people just really didn't have that visibility to and understanding of. So part of it is just like, everything we do is, done to this level of a standard. For this, we're going to do everything we always do. We're going to make sure we don't dip at all. And in many cases, we'll go like this because we know we're going to be challenged. We know we're going to have to not only assure that no corners are cut, we're going to have to prove it. We're going to have to demonstrate it. We're going to be challenged on every step of the way. When it comes to the I mean, that's just the starting point. I think people have to have confidence that we've done everything that needed to be done to make it safe and effective, and the benefits outweigh the risks. Beyond that, there's lots of other factors, I think, that fuel other people's kind of views of why they want to take it, why they don't want to take it, whether it's political, whether it's religious, whether there's lots of other things that just have to be kind of dealt with in as transparent and of a balanced process as possible. And that's a battle that's still going on. I'm going to mute you guys so I can encourage my family to be a little quiet as they walk down the stairs.
I don't hear a thing. And so, it kind of gets us into the conversation about culture. And we have a question that has come in about wondering how Pfizer and J&J manage resilience of people throughout the development of the vaccine, and what is the role of ethics and compliance in that. And I think that the way I kind of look at that is that you've got this Groundhog Day basically every day. This is not an acute crisis. This is a long-term engagement that can really wear people down and stress the systems of the organization. And so what did that look like? What has that looked like? What does it look like?
You want me to go first, Rady?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So look, I think that there's two questions there really. It's like sort of how do you manage resilience and what's the role of ethics and compliance? I will tell you, the managing the resilience has been a, as a leader in the organization, it's what I spend and my team, my direct reports and frankly, my peers, and what we spend an enormous amount of time talking about how are our people and how do we help them get through this, right? And I think there is a level of one of the reasons that I think that some of us in leadership positions are so busy is that we have added to our work a significantly more time and calls and effort in caring for our people, because it does make a difference when a leader calls and checks on you and wants to know how your family is, right? And, and that takes time, but it is worth the time, because I think that continuing to keep people motivated and frankly, helping address the issues when things are sort of become more critical for people, recognizing that we're all tired, but there are some people that their issues and their challenges are greater, and we as a organization can help them. We can provide them resources, we can take things off their plate, we can just be a listening ear, whatever it might be for somebody. Give them leave. Some people need to take leave, right? I mean, there's a whole range of things. There's not just one thing. But caring for the people, I think, is not that is just simply something that's frankly it's on all of us. I think I've spent more time checking on my friends. They've checked on me, right? I think as humans, that's something that we've just had to do. From an ethics and compliance perspective, I will tell you what we spent some time on, particularly early on, and it was particularly early on, but it has continued, is having discussions with the business about what are the business expectations. And are we setting the expectations, particularly for sales, right? And ethics and compliance, that's where we spend most of our time. Are we setting the expectations in a place that is reasonably achievable in this environment, so that we don't create even more pressure on our people, both for their own resilience and mental health and what have you, but also obviously then sometimes that can tip over into a compliance problem, right? If you're basically asking your salespeople to produce something is not really achievable unless they do some stuff you don't want them to do, right? But in this environment, it was a little bit of a different lens because the world had changed. So I do think from an ethics compliance perspective, we definitely spent time on that, but it was more of a collective culture from the whole organization of how do we take care of our people.
Thinking about culture, some of the stories that have been told over the years at Merck with the river blindness drug with Johnson & Johnson and some of the issues and crises that they had handled over the years. Stories we know are the DNA of culture. And I know that during this period, there probably been some extraordinary stories internally that relate to your employees or patients. Looking forward, like in another 5 years or 10 years, what do you think? What are some stories that people may tell about this period that will be defining for your organizations? Can you give us any examples or one example?
There are probably a billion, and we're still collecting and hearing them, I'm sure. But specific to some of the folks, I mean, just everybody who worked on the vaccine program itself, and then the people who weren't directly involved with the vaccine program, but then had to kind of help backfill and keep the other balls in the air that need to be kept in the air so that we could focus people on the vaccine program. But within the vaccine program, the stories are, the two pop into mind. The determination to meet the goal, and just the kind of the global urgency that was behind it, motivated everybody. So it was just, and because so many people were in their own little situation, what they had to do to kind of keep their own things going on was amazing. We have one story just before we're submitting one of our applications, the data was going to go into the regulators, and we had, something it was all set up. I think FDA actually sent armed guards to our facility in Pennsylvania, Collegeville, Pennsylvania, to pick up our filings and escorted it back to the agency. And we had some timeframes to get the whole thing together. And there was one of our scientists who was responsible for a couple of the tables and some part of the application who lost power. I think he's in Florida, who lost power in the middle of it all. So he got his laptop in his car and drove around looking for some signal at 3 a.m. that he could kind of poach a Wi-Fi from a convenience store parking lot. He was sitting at a gas station, and a police officer at one point saw him in the middle of the night and went up to see what was going on. And when he explained what he was doing, the police officer actually stayed there to make sure he wasn't disturbed for the couple hours he needed to do his piece. And he got it done. He pushed the button and the application went in. So those stories are just incredible. It literally was an all-nighter for him, and everybody pulled all-nighters. The other story that I think is so remarkable is while all this stuff was going on to develop to run the clinical trials, there's so much, it was so complex. Our manufacturing team had to start anticipating. They assumed success. They assumed they were going to have something. So we started manufacturing at risk long before we knew what the results of the trial were going to be. And as everybody knows, one of the features of our vaccine is just how cold it's got to be stored. And they came up with this box, this storage box that everyone's seen on TV now probably. And I remember when I first saw this box that they created, that was something that enabled them to ship, I think, up to 5,000 doses anywhere in the world safely and cold and with dry ice. And they had this whole, and just the people who went off in a room and came up with that box. It reminded me of the Apollo 13 movie, that we've all seen with Tom Hanks, and like, here's what you got to get back to Earth. Good luck. And it was just that spirit and that mentality and that creativity and that problem solving kind of a thing to knock through every wall. And it was just, that to me, and I had a version of the box here for a while, and it was just, I remember looking at it every day, just saying, holy cow, some unbelievably creative, smart people knew we were going to need this at some point, and darned if they didn't come up with it, and darned if it doesn't work real well. So just, so many of those little stories that there's a billion like that. Those are two that put a big smile on my face.
Yeah, I will say it's so inspiring, isn't it, Rady? For me, that Ernie, when you mentioned this question, I think one of the first things that came to mind for me was that we have as many companies do, a volunteer policy, right, that allows people to go and take a certain amount of time to give volunteer hours, and they're encouraged to use it to give back to the community. And we modified the policy because obviously we have a lot of medical doctors that work for Johnson & Johnson throughout, not just in pharmaceuticals, but in our medical device and our consumer business. That basically, for those that wanted to take a significantly longer volunteer time if they wanted to, if in their community they were needed to help treat COVID. And we had, a number of people took us up on it, but I remember one doctor in particular that was, basically working in a tent in New York City, triaging patients, and the stories that he told about, sort of life and death, frankly, and sort of bringing that patient experience back to the company. It was meaningful for him to be able to, I think, to use his medical degree, not go back to being a doctor, but to practice and to help. But I think it was also incredibly inspirational for people at the company to hear the stories, and not that we needed a reminder. You could see it on the news every day about what was happening to people's families and to people's lives. But to have one of our own there, and with the mask sort of pressed with the almost like the rubbing of it because we're wearing it all day, and just the good and the bad. It was quite, and we had many of those. It really was quite inspiring, both that we were helping in that community, but also continue to inspire everyone to let's try to solve this for the world.
Well, thank you for sharing those stories. I mean, it'll be really interesting, I think, in a few years to see what kinds of stories bubble up to the surface as being so closely aligned to the core values of your organization that they are defining. And that's the value of culture. By the way, Brady, a lot of people are saying they like the sign, the subliminal message in your screen that's well placed.
Thanks. No, thank you. I mean, that's the key.
And you have a science background, don't you, academically? Didn't you?
No, I forgot all that I had done, and when you're reading my bio, and I actually became an accountant. I was a CPA before a lawyer, as you mentioned, and I am so. The reason I became a CPA way back when in college was because I heard they get jobs, and it got me out of my science requirement at college. So it's just kind of and so actually, and then I spent 27 years working with people who all nailed organic chemistry, which blows my mind. And so if I had to start over again, I might have pursued that. And hopefully, frankly, there'll be a real boom for science and engineering and everything coming out of this experience, and healthcare. I mean, the opportunity for the scientists to be front and center, and boy, is it hard, boy, is it necessary. Boy, are they good at it. Boy, are they dedicated and selfless. But, if one of the things we look back on is that this was I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. So it's kind of like, the age of the dwarfs and the elves. This is the age of the scientists. And I think if hopefully there's just such renewed enthusiasm and admiration for them, and the best and the brightest will be drawn into it. That's a real positive boom for us, because whether it's healthcare issues, climate issues, you name it, there's issues that need the scientists, and they are going to get us out of this stuff. So hopefully it's and frankly, great regulators. We need people to want to go to FDA. We want to go to all the European regulators. We need great people. We need the best people in those positions. We have them, but we're going to need more going forward for sure. So hopefully people are really motivated for that. Sorry for that little commercial for the scientists, but
that's an important part of the conversation, because science is under siege.
It really, really is.
And so I think it's very relevant. We have a question that came in here. I'll take a little detour. Interested in J&J and Pfizer's coordination with outside vendors with supply chain and shipping. Any E&C concerns in coordinating among the federal and state efforts during a rapid pace of deployment? And so third-party supply issues, I'm sure that you've been very involved in that from E&C standpoint in terms of managing risk. Do you have any comments about that?
I mean, I'll jump in, Ashley, I guess. Yes, I mean, that's, third-party stuff is always one of our most, for all of us in the industry, it's one of the most significant risks we face. And it wasn't so much any new issues per se as it was the volume and the pace and the speed of which the issues had to be dealt with. And a very practical example is, as all of us really try to scale up our manufacturing capabilities, we are relying on different partnerships and third parties and contractors and suppliers. And so it's just the volume of being able to ramp that up and, to do what we need to do to gain the security and confidence that we need to have in those relationships and just do it so fast. Puts a lot of pressure and a lot of strain on the system. I think it's a common theme across the board, but I think we don't have much choice and we're doing it, and dealing with supply shortages, dealing with everything else. So it's just a zillion issues. No one issue is new. It's just the volume and the pace of them is what's kind of distinct.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say just purely from the vaccine perspective, I felt like the pandemic created a number of challenges and opportunities for the ethics and compliance professionals and for the organization. But the vaccine itself was, I mean, look, it was volume and speed, but the fact that all of our customers are governments and they're, we got like one contract with, we got one contract with the U.S., we got one contract with the U.K., right? Some of that is, frankly, I have to say, I think our legal team had a lot more sort of issues to manage and sort of how to manage this sort of unique customer relationship, I guess is how I would describe it. Then the ethics and compliance issues around it were to me, they were greater sort of from the overall pandemic than the particular vaccine, just from my perspective.
So let's see here. We got, honestly, the chat here is kind of blowing up with questions. Let me ask you this, because it kind of relates to a number of the questions. Any changes in terms of how you train employees during the last year, or what you're training them on in terms of ethics and compliance?
So, I'll jump in. I think that can I tell you one of the things, to me, I'm a firm believer in silver linings when bad things happen, particularly in ethics and compliance. Like, you should never celebrate when something goes wrong for your company or when something goes wrong for another company, although it's a little better when it's the other company. But it's an opportunity, right? We should, as ethics and compliance professionals, we have to take sort of the bad moments and figure out how you move forward better, right? That sort of has to be our mentality. And I do think this pandemic, there are a number of things that are going to allow us to move forward better, including in ethics compliance. And I think training is one of them. I don't know about Rady at Pfizer, but one of the things that we're always trying to balance is how can we resource more live interactive training balanced against the need to train everybody, right? And sort of the bigger your organization and the more far-flung they are, the harder it is to kind of figure out how do we engage in more, live conversation kind of training, because it's ideal particularly if you can get, that next level down of leaders, right, really engaged in debating, and it's time extremely well spent. And I think one of the things that we've been able to learn through this pandemic is that we can have really productive live interactions without having to travel, without having to get everybody in the same room, without, scheduling it is more doable. It's effective, and I think that's one of the things that's going to carry forward, that sort of resource gap for live interactions and discussions is going to be narrowed down a bit, because we know we can do it, and we don't have to be sitting in the same room in order to get what I think is sort of an exponential benefit for that sort of discussion versus kind of the electronic online training, which it has value. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's not the same. It's a different, frankly, it's sort of serving a different purpose. So I think that's to me, was one of the biggest benefits to come out of this from a ethics and compliance training standpoint.
Yeah, that's an area I'm excited about too, is the art of convening conversations, and that's a lost art, basically, and taking people into deep conversations about things that matter to them, and transforming organizations through dialogue. I think that's, and it's real time. And I think it has an important place. What about you, Rady, in terms of training at Pfizer?
Yeah, no, I would echo really everything that Ashley said, because I think it's right. And I think what you just said exactly, so much of our training kind of historically, when it was born out of all the things that caused our jobs to come into existence in the first place, a lot of these compliance programs and functions and everything and all the like came to being because, bad things happened. And so, what you had to immediately put in place was compulsory mandatory training. And a lot of that, the emphasis was on being able to demonstrate everybody got trained. And these, easiest way to do that were these kind of massive kind of online and other kinds of programs, which are essentially, you've got to be able to do that because people need to know the basics and the foundation. So you can make that stuff more interesting and better, but it won't go away. And I think that digital technology and all the creativity we have can make them more compelling. But what really brings it to life is what you both touched on. And it's just the ability to kind of, in a perfect world, you'd love to have a one-on-one chat with everybody to make sure that what you're really trying to draw out of them is how they bring it to life by their leadership, by their culture, by their ownership of integrity, by their own sense of how to be looking at issues. And I think what we've been experiencing in the last year has accelerated that in a big way, because it's kind of outcomes oriented training, if you will. It's kind of like, you just don't want bad stuff to happen, and you avoid bad, and you do that, because you're thoughtful in your approach to everything you do. And here's the basic questions that you just ask as a smart, intelligent, thoughtful leader, and how to weave that into kind of a pattern or a habit. And during the pandemic, we didn't have time to manage everything with the pace and speed that we've been talking about. Required that issues get identified as soon as possible and early, before they're really issues, that they get elevated if as necessary, so they can kind of be discussed and embraced and figured out, and then they get resolved. And when you did all that kind of in daily, issues would get identified, brought up, and resolved daily. Is kind of what was happening. It's amazing what an experience that is. And you do it, it takes everybody. It takes strong business leaders. It doesn't take a bunch of nerdy compliance people kind of lecturing people. We facilitate that kind of dynamic. And I think that you make every single colleague realize, wow, they've got a lot more control over this stuff than they realized. And stop making fun of our boring old compliance training, because you really you complement that by just how you act every day, and it's part of how you operate, to be honest with you. So I think this whole experience last year has been a pilot in many ways, and so we've by necessity had to have a lot of one-on-one or real group or real time kinds of things, and that's the kind of stuff I'd look to figure out how to build permanently. And if you want to call it training or just kind of culture, it's all kind of part of the same thing, to make culture enrichment and training and mix it all together to make it just very experiential. So kind of rambling, but I just think there's nothing beats, because every situation is a little bit different, and what makes the decision and the outcome of that situation right is what the individuals involved bring to it, not what our training platform is by itself.
Yeah.
Thinking about the future, I'm sure that a lot of people in our audience, ethics and compliance officers, ethics and compliance practitioners, that there are things that they're learning about themselves that will make them stronger in the future, and kind of redefine, rebrand their roles in some respects within the organization. What do you see coming out of this for your own shops? And I know that, for example, Brady, you also are responsible for risk. What do you see coming out of your own shops that you think is going to make you stronger in the future, better prepared, more agile?
The more we've all been transforming all of our functions to make them far more proactive than reactive. And you do that by really being integrated in the fabric and the DNA of the operations of the company at all levels. Not doing it ourselves individually per se, but knowing how it all works and knowing how to, and fostering that kind of mindset and that culture. And I think at the top of to me, what part of the essence of being proactive is, good old fashioned risk assessment, but a really meaningful, practical risk assessment. And it's been an important thing for me. And this helps, I think, is just when you align on risk assessment, with your business partners, you realize you're dealing with smart people who it's in their interest to their businesses will be successful if the risks are effectively mitigated. You get more real with them. Like here's the process by which we identify the top 10 things, but now let's focus on the top 5 things. What do you think? And if you have real alignment on that risk with your business partner from just a real sense, if they believe in it and you believe it and you're aligned, what to do about it is a lot easier to decide. Whether you need resources to do it, who's going to do it, all that kind of stuff is a lot easier. I think we got to be honest with ourselves is where are we not aligned on risk? And is that because they're right or we're right, or they're wrong or we're wrong? But until and what gives you the ability to strive for that alignment is when you have leaders who just have, you have great confidence or just have the right sensibilities and integrity and leadership effectiveness and behaviors that they need to have. If your leadership and the key people in all the positions have what it takes to be good in that, then there's no reason you can't find alignment. If they don't have what it takes, that's a different issue. And then that's got to be dealt with separately. But I think the more that we're viewed as kind of an innovation enabler function than a police function, I think that's a success, going to continue to make our jobs far more interesting and impactful. And I think the benefit to the effectiveness of our companies is going to be all the more so. And I want to just repeat something Ashley said at the top. It all comes back to real science and real patients, to be honest with you. And that's kind of everything's just kind of, somehow people got to see that connection. And it's amazing, at least within our industry, how quickly that clears people's focus on what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I'll just echo that one of the things that I think struck many people out of this pandemic was the ability to move fast. And I think it was that people were, in fairness, I don't know that they were more empowered, but they felt more empowered to make decisions at different levels. They would sort of have to ask your boss's boss before you act, as everyone realized we had to go. And the priorities, going to your point, Rady, about alignment, the priorities were so clear. Like we didn't waste time, sort of with I don't know, with what I sometimes consider sort of bad business ideas, right? Just because they've got some money to spend. We were like, okay, look, it's urgent, it's needed, this is what the patients need, and let's go. And I think the Ethics Compliance Office was able to be empowered and incredibly responsive to what was needed from the business to help the patients, and it did. And so I think it was from a reputation standpoint, an example. It's like, wow, the compliance organization is really, they can really help us. This is terrific. And that's the kind of thing you want to carry through, post-pandemic, I think.
Yeah, to me, a lot of our role really comes down to our advisory capacity. Can we help people solve a problem, or can we help them take advantage of an opportunity? And that's really what beats a path to our door. We're coming up, actually, I can't believe this, we got about another 6 minutes left in our session, and it's been a wonderful conversation with both of you. I would like to ask you kind of a closing question and get your thoughts. I want you to envision yourself now several years into the future, okay? You've moved on from this role, and you actually are teaching a master class in crisis management for E&C leaders. Reflecting on your experience, what are the one or two kernels of advice or counsel that you would build that course around, and that you would include in it for ethics and compliance folks based on this incredible experience?
This is a hard question, Ray. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think first of all, when I first got my job, I think I've been in it for 6 or 7 years. I remember telling my dad, and my brother-in-law happened to be at the table when I said, I got a new job at Pfizer. I'm going to be on the executive team and the chief compliance guy. And my brother-in-law, who's worked in finance, his response was, oh, they're going to hate you. And so And I remember said, come on, it's not so bad. People seem to like me. It's okay. And so, and I say that because this profession that we have that didn't exist when I came to Pfizer, it's in its early stages. And I think the potential of what it has to be as we continue to mature it, the sky's the limit. And the two things I think that I think about a lot as I, try to continue to advance it is have an enterprise mindset. Make sure you're thinking of all these issues from an enterprise perspective. And then what does the organization need most, and be a problem. So what do you need? And I think we're all maturing out of the, we've got the foundational stuff, the anti-bribery, all that stuff, which will never go away, the third-party risk management. And that foundation has to exist, has to be really strong and impenetrable. But then you've got to build off that foundation and go so much more. And I think the sky's the limit. And many of us are lawyers. And I think don't be a lawyer all the time in this job. Be a lawyer, when you really need to be a lawyer, but most of the time be a enterprise thinker and an objective, a problem solver. And I think that's what people really need: innovation and enabler and problem solver. And that's what people really need, to try to shape the effectiveness of the function in that way.
Yeah, and I completely agree, Ray. I think it's really well said, and I think I'll add sort of the more tactical piece to it. I think that ethics and compliance officers have to be thinking about is sort of efficient and flawless execution. Part of what we do in an ethics and compliance office is not just to advise, but we do have to run a program, right? We've got to have the elements, and we've got to have all the steps. We've got to be able to document what we've done. I always remind people, compliance is proof that you did it sometimes, not that you just did it, right? You got to actually show it, right? And so I do think one of the reasons why we were able to, I think, at Johnson & Johnson, sort of continue and not really lose a step in our program was because we had embraced technology and had a lot of the sort of efficiencies to be able to do things remotely, to be able to do things in an automated way, to kind of keep the trains running. And I do think if I'm teaching a class and it's the crisis management session, it's prepare ahead, right? Understand you're going to have a crisis and you're not sure exactly what it's going to be. But if you have prioritized and really driven efficiency, knowledge sharing, you've got, by the way, we should have talked about this at the beginning, you got really great people who can lead and can work through ambiguity. You'll be ready you can manage whatever that crisis is. And I do think that's part of ethics and compliance programs is preparing for the future, not just looking at the past. We don't just look for past problems and fix them. We are also avoiding and preparing for the future. So that would be part of my lesson plan. By the way, I kind of like this idea that I'm going to be a teacher.
You'll be a very good one, actually. You'll be a great.
Yeah.
Brady, we
can you imagine you both tag team teaching? I mean, what an incredible! I'm not in pharma. I'd sign up for that.
Yeah.
And you can do a lot of it virtually, but I really do want to do some of it in person. That's for sure. I think we all do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you both touched on is the importance of building our muscle as a team. And it gets to a core, something we need to pay attention to in the future, and that's capability building. And what are the kinds of abilities and the agile decision frame, mind frame that we can build in to where we can handle whatever comes up, whether it's cybersecurity, pandemic, financial contagion. Systemic risk is becoming more and more common for all of us. And everybody in this audience has to face systemic risk, and we can learn from each other. And so I want to thank you both for being here. And it's really an honor and a privilege to engage in this conversation with you. And I want to also acknowledge we had some excellent questions from our audience that we didn't get to, very intelligent and probing questions. And so let's continue the conversation in one way or another as time goes on. Thank you both.
Thank you. And can I say one more thing to the audience? You can see Brady and I have gotten to know each other, and it is one of the great things about being in ethics and compliance is to get to know your colleagues at other companies. If we all do well, all the boats rise with the tide. This is a place where we really there's a great opportunity to collaborate. Brady, thanks for joining me on this. It's been really fun to spend some time with you, and thanks, Ernie. I just wanted to thank everybody for joining and for remind people, reach out to your peers in other companies. It makes a big difference.
Thank you, Ernie. Thank you, Ashley. Thanks for the opportunity, ECI. It's really a privilege. So be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Well, thanks.
So enjoy your next breakout sessions, everyone, and we'll see you on the flip side. Thank
All right,
you.
bye.
Bye.